Hello everyone, and welcome to Mr. This is the Middle East, and here's Jordan. Now come on, let's go, shall we? Once upon a sand-swept slumbering age, eons before the dreams and visions of men were chiseled into stone, fluttering shadows wandered over the jagged ridges and dunes, and settled in the land we know as Jordan. Named for the famed river, these archaic inhabitants eventually abandoned their hunters' spears and set about structuring themselves into more organized communities, a phenomenon we call civilization. Those ancient Jordanians dwelling at Ain Ghazel fashioned some striking, we might say terrifying, statues out of lime plaster, some with enormous legs and others sporting 2 heads per torso. The Jordanians of the Bronze Age had a pretty good thing going until nomadic invaders burst in and tore it all down, and then the Egyptians swallowed up the saddened land sometime after 1580 BC. When Egypt packed up and went home, Iron Age Jordan birthed 3 kingdoms. Up the top was Ammon, in the middle was Moab, and down south was Edom. All 3 are mentioned at length in the Hebrew Bible as the perennial enemies of Israel, and war was common. There were links between the rivals, however, stretching beyond the similarities of their languages. For instance, in the Bible, Edom was the home of Esau, the brother of Israel's 3rd patriarch, Jacob, and the Ammonites and Moabites were descended from Lot, the nephew of Abraham, and that's where we get the saying, thanks a lot from. Well, not exactly. But anyway, Moab was also the homeland of Ruth, who has her own book in the Bible, and who was an ancestor of Israel's King David. But blood ties didn't stop the bloodshed. This stele, for instance, dated to about 840 BC, was written by a king of Moab called Mesha, who describes a war with Israel, which the Moabites won. Jordan's days of independence were numbered, however, as various titans took turns taking over the territory. First were the Assyrians, who ruled and exacted tribute for quite some time before the Babylonians had a go at it, who were followed by the Persians and then the Greeks. Meanwhile, however, southern Jordan had seen an incursion by an Arab people called the Nabateans, who pushed the Edomites into southern Palestine and set about establishing their own kingdom, which was enriched by an extensive network of trade. The Nabateans, who were highly skilled craftsmen and whose kingdom at its height stretched up to Damascus, are today best known for their wondrous capital called Petra, a basin-based, mountain-skirted, rose-tinted city carved out of rock. For centuries it flourished like a flower in the desert due to a crucially clever system of water preservation. And then along came the Romans, whose legions took possession of Jordanian territory in the early 100s AD under Emperor Trajan. The Romans Romaned everything up, and Jordanian Christians built what is perhaps the world's very first church building. As the centuries passed, and Eastern Rome/Byzantium and Persia fought, Jordan was often snatched by one or the other. And then, in the 7th century, in marched the Muslims from Arabia, whose forces under Khalid ibn al-Walid decisively defeated the Byzantines and established Islamic rule under the Rashidun caliphs, who were followed by the Umayyad caliphs, and then the Abbasid caliphs, and then the Fatimid caliphs. Sounds busy, but this all happened over a long time, and poor Jordan was largely neglected by its alternating overlords and slipped into dusty poverty. The next big thing that happened in the land was the arrival of the crusading knights from Europe, who, in wresting control of the Holy Land, also gobbled up much of Jordan, where they built this imposing castle. The Mamluks of Egypt controlled Jordan for the remainder of the medieval era, and then the Ottoman Turks stepped in and added it to their empire. The Turks would prove unpopular masters, only interested in collecting taxes and not offering anything to aid or improve the once prosperous region. The early 20th century saw Jordanians revolt against Turkish rule, which the Ottomans quelled with characteristic harshness. But just because a rebellion is crushed doesn't mean the underlying anger goes away, and it didn't. The Jordanians eagerly joined the British to fight the Turks in the First World War, in what's called the Arab Revolt. One of the conflict's key events took place in Jordan, at the Battle of El Aqaba, where the Bedouin leader of the Huwaitat tribe, Odi Abu Tayy, alongside the famous Lawrence of Arabia, scored a great victory over the Turks in their surprise attack on the strategic port. The war ended in Ottoman defeat, but not in the independence the Arabs craved. Rather, British rule followed in what was then called Transjordan, though it was nominally governed by the Emir Abdullah bin Hussein. Tribesmen from present-day Saudi Arabia began raiding and pillaging villages in Transjordan until repelled by the British Air Force in 1924. Full independence was achieved in 1946, with Abdullah becoming king. 2 years later, Transjordan, alongside its neighbors, declared war on the newborn state of Israel, the Jordanians managing to gain control of the West Bank, as many thousands of Palestinians sought refuge refuge in Jordan, and it was a Palestinian who assassinated King Abdullah in 1951, who believed the king intended to make peace with Israel. Jordan, along with Egypt and Syria, made war on Israel again in 1967, this time not so successfully, losing control of the West Bank, though Jordan soon claimed victory in the following year's Battle of Karama, where Israel failed in its objective to capture the Palestinian Liberation Organization's leader, Yasser Arafat. As the years passed, however, Jordan became uncomfortable with the increasing strength of the Palestinian militants in its borders, many of whom wanted to unseat the Jordanian monarchy. So Jordan took action in Black September, and in 1971 succeeded in booting the PLO out, who then set up their bases in Lebanon. 1994 saw Jordan make peace with Israel. Under Abdullah II, a number of happy reforms saw the economy do very well, and Jordan remained relatively unscathed by the 2011 Arab Spring turmoil, but was hard-pressed by the more than 1 million Syrian refugees that entered following that nation's civil war. But despite being buffeted and beset by neighboring troubles, Jordan has proven to be among the most stable and peaceful of Near Eastern nations, and today possesses a high level of human development with estimable industrial and IT sectors. But what awaits Jordan in the future, near and far? Comment below, but for now, bye-bye!